Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest this week is Jennie Coughlin, audience editor for New York Times Metro. You can find her on Twitter at Coughlin Jenny. Our host, of course, is Sri Srinivasan. He is at Sri on Twitter. We are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. My name is Neil Parekh. I'm the executive producer and occasional guest host of the show. Please like, please comment, please share. And I want to give a special shout out to everyone watching on replay. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this show whenever it's convenient for you. We are certainly looking forward to a great show today. In addition to focusing on the New York Times Metro section, there are also special sections in today's paper. It's the last Sunday of the month, so we have the New York Times for Kids, a special print only section, which we do have the PDF on our website by special arrangement with the New York Times. If you might recall, Amber Williams was a guest on our show about a year and a half ago, and we have a great relationship with the Times, and we're so thrilled that we could share the PDF with you. There's also a special section on Africa today, so we look forward to taking a look at that as well. Let's welcome a few of the folks who are watching. Pradnya Haldapur is watching from Silver Spring, and they say, "Yay! The Sri Uncle Show is back." And our friend, recent viewer, Jimmy Carter, watching from North Carolina. Thank you, Jimmy, for joining us. And Jonathan is watching from the East Village. Thank you, Jonathan. And I forgot, Pradnya is not in Silver Spring. She's at a family wedding in Long Island this week. So, Pradnya, thank you for joining us Sunday morning of a wedding. Hopefully, you still get to go to brunch today. Ken is joining us from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Naomi is joining from an overcast Upper West Side. Naomi, thank you so much again for helping us get our last guest, Jim Heaney from Buffalo. That was a great conversation with him on the investigative journalism work they're doing up there. Hi, Mom. Always got to say hi to Mom. Mom always joins. Thank you so much for joining us, and appreciate you tuning in. Linda is watching from Long Island, and Stefan is joining us from a rainy Ramsey, New Jersey. Says hello to the New York Times Read Along family. Hope all is well. As I mentioned earlier, we have a great show planned for today. We certainly want to encourage you to like, comment, share, retweet on all the platforms on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube. Our guest, of course, is Jennie Coughlin. She is the audience editor for New York Times Metro, and we're looking forward to a great conversation with her. With that, let's just a few other folks. Ram Iyer is joining from Seattle. Early morning in Seattle. Thank you, Ram. I used to live out there, so 5:30 a.m. Props for getting up early. And Leovi Stevenson is watching from the Upper West Side. Leovi, if you're a first-time viewer, let us know. So thankful that you're joining us this morning. So with that, let's bring on Sri Srinivasan. Sri, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good morning, everyone. Great to have you all with us. This is the New York Times Read Along. We do this every Sunday morning, 8:30, 10 a.m. Eastern, but it's live, as you know, right now on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn, as well as our digimentors.group website. You can also watch it on all these platforms later on the day. And if you're watching later, thank you for joining us. Please hit share on any of these platforms. Tag a friend who cares about fighting disinformation, misinformation, who cares about the news happening all over the world. We want them to join us. They can join us now or later. We want to thank our sponsors who make this possible, our friends at Muckrack. Please check them out. Muckrack is a wonderful tool for everyone in communications. If you're a journalist, they give you free verified profiles. If you're in PR or comms, you will want to get an account. And if you'd like to sponsor us, please do digimentors.group. Email me, Sri at Digimentors or Neil at Digimentors, and we will help you think through how we can help promote your brand. We also want to say that we are looking forward to our work with Digimentors. We do digital marketing events and programs like this, strategic comms, training and workshops, and help staffing and recruiting of social media managers and others. Speaking of Digimentors, we have a wonderful event coming up on November 9th, and we have a special deal for all of you. This is our AI workshop. I call it my non-scary guide to AI, and we have two terrific guest speakers. Amy Reinhardt and Mikhail Simmons are joining us. She runs AI strategy for the AP, and Mikhail is doing some amazing work around journalism and AI. And we've got a 25% off deal for all of you. You can go to the link there on the screen and use the code READALONG for 25% off. It's live, recorded, it's remote or in person. So anyone in the world can participate and join us. So please do. That's coming up on Thursday, November 9th. We have so many great folks joining us right now online. I see Ram, who is up at 5:30 because he's watching cricket, is also watching here. And Naomi says, happy birthday. Thank you, Naomi. It's been a crazy weekend with so many great wishes coming in from around the world.
Sri, she beat me to the punch. I was going to wish you a birthday myself, and I'm going to pull a Sri, so we're going to have to lean a little bit. Happy birthday, Sri. Lean the
Thank
other way. Yesterday was Sri's birthday, and wanted to make sure, uh, Sri, I mentioned this online on social, but just a quick shout out. Thank you so much for everything you do to build community, particularly with the New York Times Read Along family, but in everything you do, all your DM groups, your WhatsApp groups, on the Sri's Advanced Social Media group. It really is incredible the work that you do, the salons that you organize, the dinners. You're just constantly putting people together, and just wanted to give you a big birthday shout out. And I was thrilled to be able to use your Bitmoji in a in a fun piece. So
Thank
thank
you. And
you.
I like Bitmoji because this guy has better hair and is about 20 pounds lighter than me. So that's why I like Bitmoji. Thank you, Neil. And right back at you. You're a partner in most of my online crimes and shenanigans. So definitely appreciate that. And to all of you watching, there is no community for a community organizer if there aren't people who are willing to be organized or put together in specific ways and places and rooms. So thank you, everybody. And that's what we're doing here with the read along. Normally, we focus a lot of the time on this section of the Times, the front page and everything that's happening there. But today, because our guest is the audience editor for the Metro section of the New York Times, we're going to be spending a lot more time than usual on the Metropolitan section and talking about everything that's going on. She's also very interested and covers running. And those of you who know what's happening in New York at this time of the year, it's the New York City Marathon. So we will be talking about that as well coming up. So please tag your friends, tell them to join us as soon as they can. I want to show you, just before we bring Jennie Coughlin on, what the cover story is. War has entered its second stage, Netanyahu states. Vast tunnel network hidden by Hamas poses big risks. An Israeli army presses deeper into Gaza and remains. And here you can see some of the impact of what's been happening in Gaza. Other stories: Speaker injects fervent faith into his policy. The new Speaker, Mike Johnson, and I just sent out my newsletter about half an hour ago. There's my weekly newsletter about tech, sometimes about politics. Today, it's about politics. Mike Johnson my headline is Mike Johnson hates gays, non-Christians, and women's rights. Among other things, his wife runs a nonprofit that equates the work that's done that equates LGBT families to being involved in bestiality and incest. It's just so awful. What you're seeing there, by the way, just to pause, just Neil, let's go down and show them what those are pictures of me in three eras of my life. How I used to look, how I think I look, and how I actually look. This is all the birthday greetings just triggered that. That's a view of me in Moscow in 1974 when I was 4 years old, and then New Delhi in 1990, I'm sorry, when I was in college, and then how I look now. You've all heard of, you've all seen the fleeces that tech bros wear. This is what an Indian tech bhai or tech brother wears, as you can see. But thank you all for watching. This Mike Johnson story is about the essay that I've written is really about all the problems that are going to be ahead of us this year, thanks to all the terrible things that the GOP is doing. So please take a look at that. Thank you so much, Dan Foreman, for saying hello. Have a wonderful ride around the sun. Dan is a dear friend, mentor, and guide. Thank you for being here. And he says, amen to what Neil just said. Paula is watching from London. And good morning for many of you. Thank you, Paula, longtime producer of this show. Very grateful to her. And Nicole is watching from New Delhi, India. Thank you, Nicole. Let's see here. Money, misconduct, and the price of appeasement. Inside Kanye West deal with Adidas. And we remember that Kanye, who said all those anti-Semitic things, was dropped by Adidas, and so it's kind of an inside look at that. And here's another story. Indiscriminate art hoard draws a curious picture of Berlusconi. So I look forward to seeing that. And there's a special section, Old World, Young Africa. And it's a special 40-page section in the print edition of the Times. And you can find this print section if you're a print subscriber, but it's also available thanks to a special arrangement with the New York Times on our digimentors.group website. Please go there and you can download the PDF and get this entire 40-page section. So if you live in a place where you don't get the New York Times, subscribe to the print edition, you will want to download this very powerful print section that we're able to give you for free with our arrangement with the New York Times. There's also the kids section of the New York Times, NYT Kids, is available till noon Eastern. I'm sorry for those watching on recording much later, but till noon Eastern, the NYT for Kids is available at digimentors.group. Please look for it, download it, and then it'll disappear at noon. So if you know anyone under the age of 12 anywhere in the world, they can download it. You can give this as a gift to them. The PDF is wonderful. So I think with that, we are ready to have you meet our wonderful special guest who is joining us. Got up early for us today. Our guest is Jennie Coughlin. She is the audience editor of New York Times Metro. She's at Coughlin Jennie on Twitter.
Good morning.
Hello. Good morning. How are you
Happy
doing?
birthday.
Thank you very much. I have to say, once LinkedIn also joined the birthday bandwagon, it's like overwhelming. I don't want to complain because it's so nice that people take the few seconds to do that, but it can be a lot, and I can't get back to everybody. That's why I put together that card. Let's start with ask you, Jennie, are you a morning person on Sundays?
I'm a morning person all the time. This is actually, I don't work the shift now, but for most of the papers, I've worked the early bird shift, so starting at 5 a.m.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're used to that. And so tell us what your Sunday would have been if you weren't with us today.
So if I wasn't here, I'm a runner, which is why one of the reasons I cover running and we'll be talking marathon. I would be out running around Prospect Park probably.
Okay. For those of us not from, for those of you watching, those of us watching not from New York, tell us about Prospect Park.
So Prospect Park is like Central Park, was designed by Frederick Law Olmsted. It's considered one of his best parks. It's a park in central Brooklyn, and it's got a big loop, 3.36 miles around, and it's down around a number of neighborhoods border it, but down Flatbush where I am is not far from there. So
And it's beautiful, and there's always activities in there as well as just
it's
people.
gorgeous, and there's skating rinks, there's a lake, there's fishing, there's a farmer's market on Saturdays, lots of places where people bring dogs, several playgrounds scattered around. Just really nice.
All right. Well, before we move on, I have to ask you about the Boston Globe press pass behind you.
That is not mine. That is was my grandfather's. He was an overnight breaking news reporter for the Globe for 40 odd years. And that is his windshield placard from his early days at the Globe. He started in the 40s in high school. Went back there after he served in Japan at the tail end of World War II after he turned 18, and then went back to the Globe and stayed there until he retired in the late 80s. But it's so old that the Boston Globe logo on there, it's hand painted.
Okay.
That's how they had to do the script then. And so he would stick it in his car when he was out at fires and crime scenes, whatever. My mom has great stories about, they live south of Boston. His sister lived northwest of Boston. If they were going through town to go visit them and a fire call came over the scanner and they had time, they would detour to go check it out.
Wow. What a legacy. Tell us his name and what role did he play in your becoming a journalist?
So his byline was Gerard F. Weidman. Jerry is what he's known as. And he gave me my first reporter's notebook. I had always liked working with words. A lot of my family are teachers. I thought I'd go into that. And somehow I got involved with my high school newspaper and realized I was much more suited to that than to teaching. And so he encouraged me, gave me suggestions, passed along some of his old books from when he was at the Globe. I still have Don Murray's Writing for Your Readers, he was the Globe writing coach. And Globe Pequot Press had done this book. It was lots of advice from various Globies. So the deadline writing chapter is written by Bob Ryan, because sports folks, of course, are the ultimate deadline writers. I still have that. It still has the label with his typewritten name on it from when they handed them out to everybody on staff, and things like that. And it was just a good resource. And also, I don't know that I would have thought of it if as a career, if not for knowing that, he did it, and he did it for, his entire career.
And Donald Murray's work is always inspiring. He was a great writing coach, and so I'm glad your grandfather was able to connect you to him. Tell us about so you grew up where exactly, and then what was your journey?
So I grew up outside Boston. If you're a football fan, it's 2 towns west of Foxborough. If you're a runner, it's 3 towns south of Hopkinton, which is the Boston Marathon starting line. And went to college in the Midwest at Missouri, which is where the tiger on the bookshelf is from. And majored in journalism, worked for my hometown paper for a few years, and then worked for papers in rural Virginia and upstate New York. The Record in New Jersey was my last stop before I came to the Times. And I came here in 2019 to work on the search team on Audience.
And we'll pick up that piece of your career. Tell us what it was like to go from Boston and the Boston area to the Midwest, the great journalism school, the oldest journalism school in America, the School of Missouri. Tell us, what was that like, and to work in the Midwest and then make your way east?
So a little bit of a culture shock. And also I grew up in a, relatively small town, and Columbia, where campus is much bigger. The student body there was about the size of the population of my hometown. But it was good. You got, especially in the journalism school, because it was the first, it is one of the best. I think it is the best, but some people might disagree. It brings in a lot of folks from all over. And so I got to meet folks from all over the country. It does practical experience. So when you're doing your reporting semester, you're actually working for the city paper. They run the lab paper, they run the NBC affiliate, they run the NPR affiliate, they run magazines. And so it's very hands-on and very practical. And that was something I really liked about it. And so I had a lot of experience from that. And when you a city of, I think it's 125,000 or so, or 90,000, and you have 125 journalists every semester working at the paper. Everyone's been interviewed 6 zillion times, and they don't want to talk to reporters. And so it's a good experience learning how to get people to talk who maybe are not super interested in it.
Two things about New Jersey. One, because that's where you were at the Bergen Record. Neil and I got to go to the Bergen Record and host a Bergen Record read along, not just the Times. And that was a lot of fun, and interviewed the managing editor. We learned a lot about life covering New Jersey. And also, our friend Ron Thomas is watching from Verona, New Jersey. He actually lives in Dubai and has been a guest and been in my home as an in-person guest right before the pandemic. And he travels all over the world and usually watching from Dubai or Malaysia or something. And he's leaving for a London business trip tomorrow. So Ron, thank you so much for watching and for being such a great collaborator and supporter of everything we do. Meanwhile, Debbie Bernick is watching from DC, former New Yorker. And Neil's talking about how great it is to see so many people watching on LinkedIn this morning. And I'll ask Jenny about LinkedIn. What are your thoughts about it?
I find it's a good resource. I use it mostly to share information. We have jobs open. There are another couple of audience editor positions we're hiring for Styles and for business. So it's a good way to get that news out there and for me to keep track of folks I know from various stops along the way.
What I find with the meltdown at Twitter, that this is LinkedIn's moment. Everyone's searching for what is the alternative to Twitter, but LinkedIn could be that. But as you know, one of the big problems on LinkedIn is the spam marketing in the messages, that someone like you must be overwhelmed with people trying to sell things into the Times, getting booked in the, getting stories in the Times. Like, it must be overwhelming for a small business like mine. It's overwhelming. So I can't imagine what it's like for you. So if there were just a few things they could do, a few tweaks, LinkedIn could really rule this moment, but it's not there yet. Speaking of the meltdown of Twitter, I'd like to ask you, as our audience expert, here's yesterday's business cover: a year of Musk, from Twitter's town square to a spammy, shrinking X. So let's hear your thoughts on Mr. Musk's product.
Twitter had always been, the amount of traffic it drove to news sites was much less than the visibility that people got, and it was a place to go for live news. And that feels like, especially in the last 3 weeks or so, it has really become much less. And in fact, last night when Matthew Perry died, and that news broke, normally that's the type of thing you would go to Twitter to see what everyone was saying. And I actually went to Blue Sky, and people were talking there. And it feels like it's starting to shift where many people are abandoning Twitter and going to other places. And it's kind of a fragmented landscape. Our social team has been really trying to figure out where we should be present, where we should be active. And it varies a little bit. Reddit is actually a really good source for us on Metro, because there are lots of people on there in the NYC subreddit and some of the other subreddits, whereas Pinterest for us is not, because that's a very visual, and that's not necessarily a really newsy. So the social folks are really looking at that and trying things out, figuring out what makes sense. And we just try and, when possible, still try and get things out in front of people where they will find them. But it's much tougher to tell where that is now.
Yeah, and I blame not just Elon Musk, but Linda Yaccarino, his CEO. I wrote a newsletter a few weeks ago where I said, if Linda Yaccarino can't save Twitter, no one can. And she has shown no interest or no signs that she's trying to say no to anything Elon does. I just want to pull up the Matthew Perry obit and story for some of you who may have missed the news overnight. The popular star of Friends died at just the age of 54. And he died on Saturday. Was known for his role in Friends, the NBC sitcom that followed a group of New York City folks, young people in New York, who, of course, as you will remember, Jenny, had kind of disproportionately huge New York City apartments and things that other people didn't have, but he was beloved by a couple of generations of people who knew the show and watched it around the world. The popularity of Friends, I think, far exceeded anyone's expectations when it was put together as this kind of show. And Jonathan said he picked up the Perry story on Instagram. I've not had a chance to dive into the story myself. Nicole says, I always seem to find about celebrity deaths from Facebook. And Nicole's watching in New Delhi. And Neil heard about it on WhatsApp. And Neil has also put in a link to the obit in the Times if you're watching on LinkedIn. And Ram says, poetically, we've lost a friend, R.I.P. Matthew Perry. A week of many stories that are taking so much attention, getting so much attention. It's hard to keep track of all of them. Let's talk a little bit, if we can, Jenny, about the work of an audience editor. What is that? Your grandfather would not have recognized that title when he was getting started in the business. Maybe even at the end may not have. But tell us what that is and how you got to it. And are there many audience editors at the Times for each of the different verticals? Talk about all that, please.
It isn't even a job that existed when I started in the business. My original background was reporting, city desk editing. I some data journalism background, which actually is how I ended up in audience, because I had the skills to understand as we started 15, 18 years ago, started being able to get audience data, what people were reading, how long they were spending on it, those sorts of things. I had the skill set to kind of dig into that and figure out what we could learn from that and how we could use that to adjust what we were covering, making sure that we were covering things people were interested in and that we were using it. In a lot of cases, we found out there were things we were spending a lot of time on that people were not reading. This is not at the Times, but back when I was working in local papers. And what I do now is taking things like the social team is really focused on what's next, as Meta is really de-emphasizing news and Twitter is, kind of disintegrating. The social team is focusing on that, but then I'll take what they learn and communicate it to Metro and figure out, okay, now that we know that, how does that adjust what we do? How do we think about getting our stories in front of people where this is something that normally we would have shared it on Facebook or on Twitter, and that's where it would have found its readers? What do we do in place of that?
I understand. That's so interesting and so important at this moment. Here's a question all the way from New Delhi. Nicole's watching on Facebook. What's considered to be a great audience for a New York Times Metro story these days?
So I cannot talk about numbers at all. But one of the things and one of the reasons that there are folks like me who specialize in this is because there is a lot of nuance to this. We may have a story that gets a ton of traffic, and that's important, but we may also have a story that the traffic is much less, but we find out that a very large portion of readers finished it, which is not something. The number of readers who finish a story tends to be much lower than the number who start it, just in general. So that's something that it found its audience. Its audience might be smaller, but they really, really cared about it. Or it's something that we put out there and people really wanted to share with folks, and they thought it was important enough to tell people about it. So we look at all those different things and use that to figure out, we often have explainers that are bringing people in for something. We have a bunch coming up for the marathon, including a couple. I'm writing a guide to the marathon that'll bring folks in, but we also link out to all of our deeper coverage, so people can then get to our features and to the live blog and all of that.
Thank you, folks. You're watching a conversation with Jennie Coughlin, who is the audience editor at New York Times Metro. And we would love to get your questions and comments in. Ram, watching from Seattle while watching the Cricket World Cup, says, are you using AI to understand your user interest or sentiment?
I am not using AI. I think there are folks in the building who are looking at what there is. We do our data science folks, they come up with some tools that may have something tagged into that. I don't look under the hood on those. But we're being very cautious about AI. I think lots of places are.
And I think that's right to be cautious, and seeing where those insights can actually help you is definitely important. Ellen's watching from the Upper East Side, and Linda has a question from watching from Long Island. How does New York Times balance volume of audience who read an item versus smaller volume who might find it extremely interesting? You talked a little bit about that with the who finishes the piece. I just reminded that when the internet started and news sites got started, we used to say that you lose 50% of your audience with every scroll of, every time they go page down, you lose 50% and then 50% and then 50%. So at the very bottom, it's a very tiny percentage. Is that roughly still the same, would you say?
So we don't look at scroll depth. We're looking at it from we use a different way of looking at it. And it's an in-house metric that our data folks have built. We have a lot of folks on the data side that work very closely with the audience team. And we do balance, we want things to reach as many people as possible. We've had when our fantastic Trump team broke the news that Trump had been indicted for the first time, we were the ones to break that news. We obviously got huge traffic on that. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. But as we get into, we also are doing some really specific things, stories that might reach fewer people, but are answering questions related to that. Or the Menendez indictment, we had one story about why gold bars figured into it, and the fact that those are used as currency, and as in other parts of the country, including Egypt. And so we try and balance it out. We want to make sure we're reaching people, but we want them to be engaged. It doesn't do us any good if we reach millions of people and they get out after 2 paragraphs.
Understood. And as you said, you have a different metric that you use, but you're not able to share numbers or some of the proprietary stuff. I'm sure there are things that you do share, not your section maybe, but overall with advertisers and others who care deeply about those kinds of numbers. Let's see. Janine is asking, how does SEO play into your decisions and how does it inform your work? Search engine optimization for those not inside the business.
Yeah, and I was on the SEO team before I moved over to Metro. It's something we look at often because if people are seeking out information on something, they're searching for it, that tells us that's something we should be answering in our coverage. So when we have trials going on, I keep a close eye on search to see what questions people are asking, or when we have big news breaking, to make sure we're responding to that. And sometimes we have the coverage, but it's buried in the middle of the story. Especially if we're going live, we might pull that out into a separate item and format it so people can search and find that particular information. It also helps us for coverage. So marathon coming up this week, we have a ton of coverage, lots of features. We also have a lot of what we think of as service journalism. So I'm writing a spectator's guide to the marathon that's geared around the best places to watch it along the course and to cheer. We have a big guide that pulls in everything. So start times and when the waves go through, when people are expected to finish, how you can watch on TV, what celebrities are running, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are things we know people are going to be looking for. And so we kind of set it up with subheads so that people can find it, so that we can get them in there. And then once we get them in there, they can read all of our other coverage, including next Sunday, we'll be doing a live blog I'll be out on the course reporting. Lots of other folks will be. And we even have some runners who are running the marathon who are on staff who will be filing as they run.
Filing as they run.
They will be adding to the live blog as they are running the marathon.
I hope it's not with a laptop and with their phone as they're doing it. Folks, you're watching me talk to Jennie Coughlin of the New York Times Metro section. She is the audience editor, and she also covers running. And so that's why we're talking about the marathon that's coming up. Jennie, I want to remind our audience that we did a very meaningful to us conversation around the end of the New York Times sports desk. And we brought in an all-star cast of speakers, former New York Times sports reporters and columnists, to talk about what the end of the sports desk meant and look back at some of the great stories that were covered by the New York Times Sports Desk. As many people know, the sports desk was kind of closed so that they could move to the New York Times to concentrate on the athletics coverage. The Athletic is the former startup that was bought by the New York Times. And as you can see here with Laurie Mifflin, Claire Smith, George Vesey, Bill Roden, that's what we call, if you know your sports terminology, baseball terminology, a murderer's row of great columnists and writers. And as you talk now about writing, about running, how does that fit in with the Athletic, which may not be covering the marathon as much as it covers other kind of team sports and things? So is this a lane, if you will, for New York Times own people to cover this particular sport?
So marathon coverage has always been a tag team between the sports desk and Metro. And I was involved when I was on the search team. And then last year, which was my first year on Metro around the marathon, I ended up getting pulled into writing about it. The reporter who was going to do it had got, I don't remember why. I think the E. Jean Carroll case, they selected the jury faster than we expected. So she had to go do court coverage. And so I jumped into writing about it. And I wrote for the running newsletter, which is one of the things that did not survive the dissolution of the sports desk. But I think if you look at our live coverage and our regular coverage this week, you'll see it's very similar to years past. We'll have the course map, and one of the runners, Talia Minsberg, who used to be on sports, is now on Well, is going to be writing about the course from a runner's perspective. She'll also be filing from the race as she runs it next Sunday. We'll have David Waldstein, who is now on Metro, used to be on sports, is doing a neat thing where he and a photographer went out and they drove the course in midday traffic to see how long it takes to drive it compared to running it.
Do you remember what the answer was?
I'm not going to spoil it. That story will be out midweek. Okay. And just to look at the traffic, and obviously they had to contend with a lot of things. The runners will not, because the roads will be closed
and clear.
The runners don't have to deal with double parking and all sorts of things. But also just a big look at traffic throughout the city. And the course, it starts on Staten Island, goes over the Verrazano, up through Brooklyn, over the Pulaski into Queens, Queensboro into Manhattan, up into the Bronx, then back down. It's a really interesting tour of the city.
Sure. You know, so I'm gonna put out a number, and I want to see if others want to put out a number, guessing what the answer is going to be, how long it took that team to drive through the course, and then we can see who was closest. The marathon numbers around 2 hours. The elite get to run it right about 2 hours and change. And I think the world record was recently broken, not at the New York City Marathon, but at another.
No, and the world record New York is a tough course. It's very.
No, it'll never be broken here. No, you're right. Yeah,
right. So the times are going to be slower. So I think the course record is 2:05, 2:06, somewhere around there, compared to obviously the world record is under 2:01.
2:01. So 2 hours on a clear marathon day is what it takes the elite runners. What's your guess? The New York Times folks who drove during midday traffic drove all of that. So I would guess around 2:30 to do it all. It might be much less than that, but let's see. Why don't you all guess as well? What number would you say? How many hours would it take to drive that entire length during midday traffic? So we'll see those numbers and we'll take a look. And I'm also curious. So running kind of survived this the merger, if you will, of the sports teams. What about the things like the chess column and others? Did they also, if you know the answer, and you may not, Jenny, are they still being covered from the Times rather than from things like from the Athletic? Do you know?
So we have a lot of things that we still, business of sports, we still have a big team covering that sitting over on the business desk. Talia, as I mentioned, moved to Well did fitness. We always, our running coverage was always kind of split between Well and sports, still happening over on Well. And for Metro, we're still covering big events in the city. The marathon, as much as it is an elite sporting event, as well as a mass participation one, I run my marathon time would be around 7 or 8 hours, but I can run the same course as Eliud Kipchoge. Not that he has ever run New York. But it's also a big, if you've ever been out, a big community event. There's going to be, for all the 50,000 runners, there's going to be thousands, millions of people out along the course cheering next weekend.
Sure. Manoj put in a weight, threw out a number. He said about, I think 3 hours was what the number he had put in. 3 hours and change is what he's betting is the number that it takes. It took the New York Times team to drive the course, the marathon course. I said 2:30. So let's see. Others jump in with your numbers as we go through here. Folks, we're talking about the New York Times, about audiences, about online coverage with Jennie Coughlin, the New York Times Metro section's audience editor. Laura said 7 hours is what she's guessed is what it took them to drive. And Jenny knows the answer. Ram is 4.5. So we're seeing, so no one's hopeful that it's actually maybe the folks are running faster. Borstein says, unless you're using GPS, in which case it's 4 hours. Okay, so I was maybe too optimistic. Sudha says 3 hours. That's Neil's mom watching. And are they stopping for pizza in each borough? My guess is 3.5. And Neil wants to do that.
I got to jump in on that. Definitely, you should stop for pizza along the way if you're doing this. And
Neil loves New York City pizza. Yeah, Neil's great.
That is actually, Sandra's a friend of mine from my running club, and when she and her husband ran a few years ago, they did stop in each borough for pizza as they ran the marathon.
Are you serious? I would. Okay, so Sandra, I would love to. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment. Pizza is my thing. I would love to know where you stopped in each borough, if you remember, if it was planned out or if you just randomly picked a corner and stopped somewhere. And extra points if you made sure not to put pineapple on your pizza, because if you did, it's over. It's all over. I'll go now.
Thanks, Neil. And Sandra, I'd also love to hear how long it took you with the pizza stops to run the marathon. Let's see here. Deborah is watching from Asheville, North Carolina. By the way, Debbie, as you might know, last year, one of the big restaurant awards said the best restaurant in America, not best new restaurant or best Southern restaurant, best restaurant in America was an Indian restaurant in Asheville, North Carolina. And I've been looking for excuses to get to Asheville, so I hope to see you there. Let's see, MD is asking on YouTube. That's another channel we're on. Loving this conversation. I'm wondering how hard it is to assign stories that may be less popular. That is, what if an editor considers something vital to put out there for readers' eyes? Yeah, that's a great kind of conflict that you might have some tension between stories that matter and stories that will be watched. So talk about that, please.
Yeah, we have stories that we know are not necessarily going to get a ton of eyeballs, but they're important for us to do. They go to the mission of what we do. And so we do those. I don't think it's tough to assign those. I don't do the assigning. I just kind of inform all the editors who do about what's going on. But for example, Rikers Island, which is the jail for New York City, for anyone who's not familiar, and is hugely problematic. And we've done some big looks at it, but we also keep track of just the number of inmates who die there, which has been, a fairly high number in recent years. And we know that stories of individual inmates dying is not going to get a lot of traffic, but we do think it's important to note those as they happen. So one of the suggestions I had made to the team was, rather than have the debate every time somebody dies of how much we should do, we just have a running file that tracks all of the deaths at Rikers, and every time somebody dies, we add to it and put information in there so you can see who died and what we know about their deaths all the way through. It does not get a ton of traffic, but that's not the reason we do it. We do it to hold the city accountable. And, we do those stories to hold the city and other institutions, other people accountable. We love them to get as much audience as possible. Our big investigation on yeshivas back in the fall was one that was very much for the mission, but also want to make sure we got in front of as many people as possible. It has the most impact.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing that. Folks, we have just about 45 minutes with Jenny. We haven't even gotten to the paper yet, so we're going to do that in just a moment. People are still guessing how long it would take to do that. Drive. Leovi says 3.5 hours, and somebody here, Jonathan, has nominated Neil for New York Times pizza columnist. I think you'd have to move from from DC to New York to make that happen. I think he would do it
I'll
for that opportunity.
I'll commute. I'll commute.
Okay.
Amtrak.
And Ram, watching in Seattle, says service journalism, Jenny, a pizza stop map for the New York Times marathon. I mean, the New York Marathon, I think would be kind of interesting. I also want to thank Shadrach, who's watching on LinkedIn in Kenya. So this is where we have a worldwide audience here. And as Jenny can tell you, Kenya and Kenyan runners dominate running around the world, all these marathons around the world. And I also want to thank our friend Aliyah Papagiorgio, who's watching in Brussels, who has retweeted this, and told her audience about this. So please tag your friends on any of our platforms. We're live on Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, as well as Facebook and digimentors.group. Please tell your friends and they can watch live or later. We'll be on all of these platforms as soon as we are off the air. So please do that. I also want to remind everyone, especially my friend watching in Kenya, that there's a special section just on Africa called Old World, Young Africa. And there's a 40-page PDF that's available right now on digimentors.group. That's our website, digimentors.group. You can download it for free and have that. So please take a look. We want to thank our friend Wayne Camadoy, who's on the design desk of the New York Times, who makes that possible for us to share. So I think we're ready to talk about the news. Tell us about what your week was like while I pull the paper up, Jenny. This, if you look back, very newsy week, so much going on. Well, how does it affect the audience desk?
So it affects, I used to say when I was on the search team, if any desk in the newsroom was having a busy news day, I was having a busy news day. Now it's only when Metro's having a busy news day, which one of the things this week, obviously, the Trump trial is going on. This is the civil trial the Attorney General has brought against him. So that's been going on. And next week, his children are all testifying. And then the following Monday, the day in between the marathon and the election, because we have city council elections, Trump is scheduled to testify. So I'm not sure who was scheduling all of that, but nobody on Metro. That'll be a very hectic 3 days for us.
Yeah. And then there are all the protests happening all over the city. And
we
so
had
there's
folks out
always
staffing all of the protests. We're keeping track of all of those. We make sure between staffers and stringers, we have folks out there. And, we've been doing a number of stories because we have, obviously, in New York City, both a very large Jewish population, also a large Palestinian contingent. And so we're doing stories, hitting all of the things that make sense locally for this.
Thank you. Here is the front page of the New York Times this Sunday. War has entered its second stage. Netanyahu states vast tunnel network hidden by Hamas poses big risks. Israeli army presses deeper into Gaza and remains. Jenny, just a lighter moment in a very tough story. As an editor, how much time do people spend making sure they get the it's correct in a headline like this?
I actually don't work on the print edition, but we're always taking a look. And on Metro, we have almost all the editors weighing in on headlines just so we can make sure we get the best one. Those are digital. Print does its own because there's really constraints on print.
And that's why they do their own headlines separately from what you're from the digital side. That's really important for readers to understand. Speaker injects fervent faith into its policy. This is Mike Johnson, the new speaker, Republican speaker. Money, misconduct, and the price of appeasement inside Kanye West deal with Adidas. So this is a story from earlier this summer, and a deep dive here. I look forward to reading that. I don't know if you've seen it. Please weigh in on any story that you have read that you want to give a shout out.
The Kanye one is a Megan Twohey dug into that. It's a really good investigation. I haven't had time to read the whole thing yet. Folks who subscribe to the morning email she kind of guest hosted that on Friday, and went through some takeaways from that look at how it went. So the deal went on so long, even as he was saying things before it did finally dissolve.
And here's a story out of Italy. Indiscriminate art hoard draws a curious picture of Berlusconi. We'll go in here inside the Times. We love looking at this because it gives us a sense of what's going on, the story behind the story. A critic with monsters on his mind. The scariest part of Eric Piepenberg's job, films that failed to truly frighten or surprise him. A headline from history, City plans Fulton Street Mall in Brooklyn in 1973. And of course, that's come true. And here to help, even short runs have major health benefits. This is all something that you can talk about here. This is Markham Hyde's advice that even short runs can help. You, of course, run marathons and you cover running. So talk about that, please, a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not running marathons these days. 5K is about my limit right now. But this is something that the Well Desk did, and they've been doing a lot of that. A lot of folks picked up running during the pandemic. You could do it outside. You could do it socially distanced. You didn't need special equipment. And so as I've talked to race directors for various stories over the years, they all say they see just many more people out running. And in a lot of cases, they're short runs.
And short runs are not just okay, they're good is what this says. And you get a mental health boost as well.
Yes.
And here's a less polarized Poland. Not yet, election results show. And big gaps on gender, age, and geography. And the populist right-wing government did not get reelected. Let's go in here. A rare venting over missing sons and daughters. This is a story about Ukraine, and the Ukraine coverage still continues. I think the Times does excellent coverage, even as not everybody in the world is able to pay attention. Kremlin's pick to lead Kiev is shot in Crimea. Ukraine targeting pro-Russian figures. A former lawmaker who took part in the invasion by Moscow. And after Mexico hurricane, a frantic hunt for food, water, and loved ones. And these stories of what happens after natural disasters as well as man-made disasters is such an important part of what journalism covers, especially newspapers when television networks move on. In Gaza, a growing fear that we are living the last of our days. Hamas sites are concealed by hospital, Israel says. And Netanyahu rallying his country says war is in second stage. As China looks to broker peace in Gaza, anti-Semitism is surging at home in China. I had not thought about anti-Semitism in China. A kindred spirit, Biden's solidarity with Israel spans decades. And the long story here, Peter Baker's piece, and the vast tunnel network hidden by Hamas, and a Shiite crescent, the proxy forces Iran has assembled across the Middle East. Just look at this really deep coverage. And sensitive issues are put off at the Vatican. An Iranian girl in coma dies weeks after her collapse. We had talked about this story about this young girl, 16 years old, who had collapsed in mysterious circumstances while not covering her hair in public. A Biden plan to protect Wyoming land elicits anger and threats. Climate policies breed distrust in some states rich in oil and gas. And it's really when you read the print section, the print paper, Jenny, that you kind of see this division, national, international, things like that, because online they all kind of blend together, as you know.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can find those sections online. There's pull-down menus in the top, but print is obviously set up just much differently.
And a Uvalde mother runs for mayor to help city heal. Uvalde, as some of you know, was the city in Texas where there was a horrifying school shooting, as all school shootings are. There's a big ad for Google. They are training more Americans to stay ahead of cyber attacks. And this is part of that investigative story on Kanye West's deal with Adidas. Very in-depth story. Oh wow, it goes on 3 full pages and starts on the front page of the Times. And in pivotal Michigan, Muslim and Arab voters feel betrayed by Biden and what's happening in Gaza. Democrats split over Israel as many young, diverse left break with the president. So as you can see here, both sides or people in both sides are angry with the president. New York Times tow truck driver is charged in boy's death. Oh, horrible. 7-year-old was 73rd pedestrian killed this year.
Yeah, that was a horrible story. And that's actually, this is in the Sunday paper, but that happened Thursday, maybe. Because digital reaches everyone, the print paper sometimes has stories days after.
And that's also part of the New York Times wanting to be that paper of record, right? So they want to get that story even if it's many days late. And this is big news in the Republican circles of the election primaries. Pence is bowed out of the race that Trump is dominating. And the UAW reaches a tentative deal with Stellantis, one of the car companies. I got to say, I'd never heard of Stellantis till the strike started. I didn't know what that car company was. After lockdown, residents emerged with fortitude. This was in Maine after what happened with the shooter, and he had purchased those guns legally. Let's move on to the obituary section. I am a big fan of the New York Times obituaries, read them carefully, and very interested in the topic. We've had Amy Padnani join us, who was the New York Times obituaries writer who came up with the overlooked section, and she is going to be back with us on November 19th, Sunday, for her book that came out of her series, Overlooked, a celebration of remarkable, underappreciated people who broke the rules and changed the world. As many of you know, the New York Times, during its history, had not written obituaries for some very important women, people of color, that it should have. Diane Arbus, for example, world famous photographer, very popular work that she did, very important work that she did, pivotal work in the history of photography, didn't get an obituary. This is one example of so many people. So she'll be back on November 19th. Please join us then. You will learn a lot. Anthony Holden, royal chronicler who ruffled the palace, dies at 76. And Joanna Merlin, 92, Broadway actress who became a top casting director. Have you written obituaries at the Times or elsewhere?
No, I mean, I've written them, and I worked in a lot of local newsrooms that were very small, and so I've written them there. I've not written any at the Times.
Joe Hill, 76, who put the R in retail at Seaport. This is about the New York's, South Street Seaport, I guess. He has died. An eccentric purveyor of marine trinkets recalled a bygone era. And that's the obit section. And there is still sports here in the Times, and they just have the bylines of folks mostly at the Athletic. And are you interested in other sports, Jenny?
Oh yeah, I grew up outside Boston, so obviously I'm a Red Sox fan, Patriots fan. Grew up 2 towns west of Foxborough. College basketball, I can watch, any 2 teams play that. That's one of the few sports I don't have to care about who's playing.
All right, we're going to spend some extra time today on the Metropolitan section because she is the audience editor of New York Times Metro. And she will start by telling us a little bit about the Metropolitan section itself and its role in the paper and who gets access to it. And also the New York Times Metro digital versus or collaboration with the print section. How does that work?
So the Metropolitan section is the one day a week that Metro has a specific print section that we feed into. It is printed earlier in the week. It closes on Thursdays, and so it does tend to have a more featurey feel because anything newsy is going to end up in the A book, the front section. So we have a Dan Barry piece leading the way about this sign kerfuffle in Greenwich. That actually, I was talking with Bill Ferguson, the editor on this, who Dan mentioned it as, it might be a news story. This lawsuit had finally settled. And as he was talking about it, Bill said, no, this is, let's tell a story about it. And so if you read through, the lawsuit is in there, but it doesn't show up until fairly far down. It's a fascinating story about fake signs. And then we have the food carts. This is Andrew, who is also someone who came over to us from sports, looking at these 8 food carts that are all selling this one single fuchka in Jackson Heights, I believe. All in the same area. So you see this in a lot of parts of the city where there'll be pockets. I live in the little Caribbean section of Flatbush, and so you can find all of the, Caribbean restaurants and cuisines in the area. Here, this is a spot in Queens that has Bengali all in the same area.
And they're all selling the same item, and they're competing about who made it first, whose is better, etc. Reminds me of an old Mad Magazine cartoon, Jenny, where they had 4 pizzerias next to each other, and one says best in the city, best in the state, best in the country, and then the last one says best on the block, and that's the one that's full. So this having all of these next to each other is kind of interesting. The Bengali treat fuchka is crispy and orb-like, sweet and spicy in a single bite. I guess this is also called golgappas in other parts of India, but this is the Bengali twist on this.
Yeah, and Andrew actually has a paragraph in there it's like if Original Rays and all of the other all set up shop on the same block. And that was actually his analogy for that.
Right. And so tell me more about the Metro stories we're looking at, please.
So here we've got 2 of our 3 columns that appear weekly. So Sunday routine, which is we always follow somebody around through what their Sunday routine typically is. Sometimes it's a really well-known name. Other times it's somebody who has, in this case, an unusual job, or is involved in something that you may not know them, but you know the work they've done. We had a costume designer for a big net streaming show. I want to say Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, but I might be making that up, several months ago. And then comments on something. In this case, it was Ginny's Big City column from last week, and above the reader comments, our own little letters to the editor section, is Ginny's column this week about the oldest house in Manhattan that if you touch it, you're going to get a piece of it falling away in your hand.
Oh, no.
It's so
and that's Ginny Belafonte's column, and it's always interesting, and I'd love to get her on the show, Neil. We've got to work on that for next year. We're all full up for this year, which is amazing, and we're very grateful to our guests like Jennie Coughlin, who's here on Long Island, a prom for a new era of farmers.
And this is actually a good, so we cover New York City, but we also cover the rest of New York and New Jersey and Connecticut. So we have Long Island, we have Greenwich in here. This is a lot of folks from the city who've moved out to Long Island and gone into farming. And this was our celebration at the end of the harvest season.
And Sarah Maslin-Nier, my former student, has been a guest on this show, and she was for a while a nightlife correspondent or columnist for the Times. And we have a mayor now who is very interested in nightlife in New York and making sure that that's thriving. And then let's get your take on and explanation of what Metropolitan Diary is, because that's such a staple of the Times.
It is. It's actually, even before I started the Times, that was my favorite part of the paper. So it's stories from around New York with fantastic illustrations by Agnes Lee. If you were on the Times Square shuttle for about a month in August this year, you got to see her illustrations life-size. We took over a car that was all Met Diary. And they're really great stories. And one thing, when I started doing audience for Metro, discovered that nobody knew, and is always surprised when I say it, the people who read this online largely are not New Yorkers. It's probably the New Yorkiest item we run in the paper, but its audience is very broad.
That's so interesting. Let me read the shortest one I can find here. Ushered out, Dear Diary, I was at a Broadway theater waiting for the show to start when a couple approached the people in the row in front of me. I think you two are in our seats, one said to the people sitting there as they compared one another's tickets. An usher arrived and had a look. You're right. These are your seats, he said to the couple. However, you're in the wrong theater. Oh my God, that's funny. So then you have to rush over. Fortunately, all the theaters, as you know, are mostly right next to each other. So hopefully they made the curtain. And here's another story about the political punking of Greenwich. And then talk about this story
So
here.
this was a story we went out to. It's a vintage fashion show or vintage shop. It shows up a few times a year. Lots of outlets that sell people who really like vintage. But this is something along with the Fuchka story, that these are just bits of the city that we like to cover to, convey it's a big city. There's lots of little facets to it. And part of what we do on Metro is, tell those stories to folks who are not part of that particular little piece of New York.
Well, we have proof that non-New Yorkers read this because Ram says New York City fans like me in Seattle, saying true that. And then Sandra, who is in Jenny's running club, says, I love Metropolitan Diary. So folks, check that out. If you are not a New York Metro Diary reader, check that out. You can find it online. And then how does the real estate section intersect with Metro, or is that like a business section deal and not connected to you folks?
It's its own desk, although the editor on there now, Nikita, was on Metro before she went over there. One of the interesting things with Metro is we cover a lot of things that other desks often cover. We have a climate desk, but we also have a climate reporter on Metro. We have folks who cover real estate. There's also a real estate desk. We just communicate and make sure that we're discussing. We had a story on New York's role in Billions, the Showtime series that's ending today, which we let Culture know about. Culture was also doing coverage for Billions. And it's a lot of talking.
So, for example, Roz Chast, the famous New Yorker cartoonist, she could be the subject of a Sunday routine very easily, and could also be here at home in the real estate section. So, is it like who gets first dibs, or whoever made the call first? How does that work?
It's a lot of talking, and most things there's a desk. If real estate is already working on something, then we will back off. If we come to it before we start pursuing it, we might go to real estate and say, hey, we're looking at this. Just make sure it doesn't conflict with anything.
Marilyn says, love the Metro section. Marilyn worked with us at Digimentors, and I see is already in Halloween mode. Her photo on Facebook is already got Halloween pictures, her and Peter. Let's see. This is actually an interesting story that we've not talked about here. The city has taken on Airbnb and made some aspects of it illegal, anything less than 30 days rental. And if you remember when the city took on Uber about a decade plus ago, Uber made a whole campaign to fight back and used everyday people as part of that campaign. It doesn't seem that there's a full court press to fight this, using the community and how people use it as a source of revenue. I don't know if you've caught that in your coverage or paid attention to it.
We've done some coverage on it, yeah. And
basically, from December, as I understand it, you have to rent for a minimum of 30 days to be able to get an Airbnb in New York. So you can imagine what that will do to prices of hotel rooms, which are already sky high, much higher than the pandemic, and the availability of places for people to stay, because Airbnb has been a boon for people who need to stay in New York. And how many people are going to visit for 30 days in New York City? That number is going to be very, very small. Neil, thank you so much for linking out to it and giving us the story so people can read it. And he's put that in both Facebook and on LinkedIn. And folks, that's part of why this show and the work that we do at Digimentors is different. We make sure that we are annotating the conversations and not just putting a camera. We're trying to give you context as much as possible in everything we're doing. Let's look at the New York Times Magazine. I love reading this. And this is about scientists who are watching their life's work disappear. David Obura has studied coral reefs for over 30 years, and they're disappearing. And this is the Times Magazine. Any thoughts on the magazine as I kind of flip through it?
It's a really great, that's one I often will hang on to if I don't have a chance to read it in a given week. A lot of the stuff in there obviously is good longer term. So I sometimes have a few of them stacked up waiting to read through them.
And I take them on flights with me, this and New Yorker magazines, because there are so much evergreen content. A narwhal tusk in the hands of Kristen Ladry, an ecologist specializing in Arctic mammals, which are especially threatened by climate change. What a photograph, her hands on this narwhal tusk. Wow, it's really powerful. And there's so many sections in here and little items that they do. Senior year, television celebrates older people, but only for seeming like sexy young ones. This is about the Golden Bachelor. I don't know if you caught that or any of the attention around that. The truth seems to dawn on the septuagenarian widower. Older women are not what they used to be. I'm not sure what all of that's about, but average age of streaming television viewers last season 40, average age of broadcast viewers 62. So that
Mhm.
tells you. And I also love reading these interviews that are done by David Marquesi. I'm not sure his pronunciation. And the poem this time, Suddenly Last Summer by Lisa Jarneau for Rod Smith. The poetry is also so nice here. And we'll just keep going. Let's see here. The ethicist column. I don't know if you get time to read into this. I always like to see if we can ask our guest their thought on one of these letters. What are your obligations when your dog impregnates another one? Are you a dog owner?
I am not a dog owner.
Okay. So I don't know if you have an opinion on this story without reading through it all, but the ethics of this are always fascinating. Normally the questions are about dogs biting another dog, but this is about impregnation. This is tab hoarding, letter of recommendation. How our browsers comprise ongoing autobiographies. And here's a tech tip that we're going to give everyone watching. Neil gave me this tip. It's called One Tab, one hyphen tab. If you're using Chrome and a couple of other browsers, it's the best way to keep track of your tabs. And if you have too many tabs, you can compile them together very easily. So one-tab.com. one-tab.com. It will change your life if you're a person who uses too many tabs in your browser, as I do. So check out one-tab.com. Let's see who's watching here. Dr. Tachi is watching for Fort Lauderdale. Dr. Tachi has terrific shows on Instagram. Please go and find them and connect with Dr. Tachi. And I get the digital version of the Times, so I miss reading the physical magazine. A lot of people who join the show join for that reason, Jenny, because they want to see what the paper looks like these days, and often are surprised how much print there still is in the New York Times Magazine. Read Like the Wind by Molly Young, Two Serious Ladies. So what is this? This is about reading fast, or I don't know what this column is about.
I'm not super familiar with that one.
And this is Eat, the Eat column, a little luxury. This earthy, sweet Nigerian stew is worthy of occasion. Stew is a luxury because it demands what we seem to have the least of these days, time. Tell us about your relationship with cooking.
I don't do as much of it during the week as I would like, but I do like to do it. And I love the cooking section and all of the recipes. And this is looking like something that would be good to add into the rotation now that we're finally getting some cooler weather.
Yes, yesterday was 80 degrees here, but now it's back to November weather. And the runners like you and others want it to be cool when you're running long distance. For non-runners like me, that may not be intuitive, but you folks know better.
Yeah, the general rule of thumb is you should dress like it's 20 degrees warmer than it is. So last year's marathon, which was, if you were a spectator, quite pleasant, you could be outside in a t-shirt, was really brutal for the runners. I was cheering up in Harlem right at the top of Central Park, and that's around mile 22, 23. The number of folks who just looked like they were dying by the time they got to that stretch because it was so warm out. So next weekend, It would be very nice if it were, 30s, 40s low, high in the 50s, maybe the low 60s. Anything warmer than that's going to be really rough on the runners.
So 30s, just for everybody watching who's not Fahrenheit, we're talking about the low digits, very low digits in Celsius. And Ron is leaving us. Ron, thank you for watching always, and enjoy your trip to London and home to Dubai. Ron Thomas, former guest on this show. The climate issue. Oh, I didn't even realize that. They call
That's
it.
what all the scientists are. They're all researching
Yeah.
stuff that climate change is destroying.
But look how tiny the climate issue was. I didn't even notice that it's the climate issue. And so this will have lots of great pictures, I'm sure, because that's one of the things the Times does so well, as you know. In far northern Canada, coming to terms with a future marked by uncontrollable fire. And we saw the impact of that, right? The haze here in New York. We had Everything seemed orange for several days. Bearing Witness, Essay and Interviews by Catherine Einhorn. This is about studying the effects of climate change often means watching the subject of your life's work disappear. Great photography here. And this was the gentleman on the cover, David Bora and Andreas Rivera, Mountain Glaciers, Central Chile and Patagonia. Keith Parker, Salmon. I hope the salmon aren't running out, but apparently they are, in Northern California. And this is D. Boersma, Penguins in Argentina. Wow. Look at these photographs. These are people who work with their hands, you can see, even though they're scientists. And what are these pictures? This is Hannah Mounts, Hawaiian forest birds in Olinda, Maui. And this is Patrick Gonzalez, trees in the Sahel in Senegal. Get help. How climate anxiety is challenging and transforming the practice of psychotherapy. This story ran maybe even last week online, but I know this would have gotten a lot of attention.
Yeah, as more and more the Sunday paper is often a collection of things. We have the City Mouse, Country Mouse story in Metropolitan that went up online middle of last week sometime.
Make like a tree. Redwoods can't easily migrate, but in a warming world, some humans are helping them and other species try to find new homes. So I guess they're transplanting the smaller versions of these trees or these whole giant trees. I can't imagine how you do that. Beautiful photographs and a coast redwood sapling in. So they move saplings around, I guess. And then, are you a puzzler?
I am a puzzler, although I tend to do the games app Connections, which is our newest one. I quite enjoy.
I have not seen it yet. What makes it different from all the other games?
So it's 16 words, a 4x4 grid, and they break down into 4 categories. And you have to figure out what the 4 categories are.
Okay.
And it can really vary what they are. And part of the puzzle is figuring out how they've been organized. There are often a few words that could seem like they go with one group and actually go in another one.
Oh, there it is. Now, can we try to solve this now very quickly?
Sure, I haven't done today's yet.
Okay, so what is this exactly? So these are 4 words. So you have to find one connection for all 16 things?
So there's 4 different categories, easiest to hardest.
So neck, body, you have to put 4 things, right? Neck, body,
4 things together. I'm looking.
Neck, body, face, and eesh.
And often when you can find 3 of them and not the 4th, or you can find 5. If there's 5, one of them is usually a different meaning of the word.
And Sri,
maybe the bridge of your nose, Neil. Maybe bridge. Try bridge.
It could be bridge. So you'll hit submit, and it'll say 1 away. So there's something off with this combination. I've been playing it as well, and it's not just categories, but it could be like prefixes for other words. It could be there's some connection between 4, but there are 4 sets in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Fret, brood, and stew are all types of worrying. Fret, brood, stew.
That sounds right. We're fret, brood, stew, and then so I don't know what the 4th one would be.
Yeah,
that's the challenge, I guess. Yeah,
the tough one. Yeah.
All right. Well,
do you know, Jenny? I'll ask a quick question. The crossword, when it goes during the week, it gets it's harder Monday through Friday. Sunday is just a larger version. Do you know if Connections does that as well, or no?
No, and Connections is also, I think, difficulty varies. I saw somebody who was really frustrated. They could not get one day this week, and it was a day that I had zipped through. But then there was another day that people found it very easy, and I did not solve it in the 4 tries you're allowed.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I think this is more specific knowledge, but it's also an interesting if you're a word person, as I am. because you often have to know alternate meanings of words or alternate something, the verb version versus the noun version.
Neil, can you just remind folks that we had a great puzzle show a few months ago?
Yes, Greg Pliska was our guest on the show. It was at the end. It was at the beginning of the year, in fact, after the Puzzle Mania that they do at the end of the year.
Sure.
Greg had he didn't do the big puzzle, the big crossword, but he did several of the smaller puzzles. So he joined us to talk about that.
And I can tell Jenny, as I tell everybody, that I'm the last person in the world not to have tried Wordle, and never been into that. But look forward to trying it someday. Dr. Tachi says I can't wait to dive into this game, and Laura Silverman says, watching from Philly, definitely a fan of Connections. Here is MD's question regarding audience: how much, if at all, does online readers' comments figure into the assessment of a story's audience?
So it can vary. A lot of times, if we're seeing lots of comments hitting on the same thing, our community team will flag them. Somebody will message me like, hey, we're getting a lot of questions about this. Maybe this is something to address in a story. Or we're seeing that there's confusion about something, or maybe gives us ideas for future stories. And it can also just be, Met Diary has a great commenting community, folks who check in every week and know each other, and it's kind of like a little community party down in the comments. And that's something we value as well. We want people, especially as the social media landscape fragments, being
Sure.
able for people to come and have that discussion that they might have had on a social platform before.
Folks, we have just under 10 minutes left, and we have a lot to cover with Jenny. So we're just going to quickly zip through these, and then we're going to take a very short break, do some housekeeping, and we're going to come back to Jenny and ask her for some kind of pro tip about her work. She can be about journalism, can be about writing, can be about running, can be about anything she likes. So we'll give her a chance to catch her breath in just a couple of minutes. We're looking here at the special section, Old World, Young Africa, a 40-page section, Declan Walsh's cover story. And you can find this entire PDF available for free at digimentors.group. Digimentors.group. Please download it. Let us know. We are very grateful to Wayne Camadoy, who designed this section, for sharing that with us. And you can see it's always the work that he does and the paper does on these special sections. Really, the photography, the words, the graphics all come together so beautifully here. So everyone, please check this out about the population explosion in Africa. Old World, Young Africa. And thank you, Wayne, for always supporting us. Here is book review, House of Horrors. Elizabeth Hand's A Haunting on the Hill is set in the same mansion as Shirley Jackson's novel. So I'm not a horror person, but maybe this is all lots of horror special stuff in here. And of course, please jump in, Jenny, as you for any of the things we're talking about here. More horror.
I am also not a horror person, so I saw this was the cover. I was like, I've never seen the movie, never going to see the movie. I don't like to give myself nightmares. But for those who are horror, this looks like a really great.
And look at this too, right? So
Yep.
the book review and this horror, hysteria, and a spinning head, reconsidering The Exorcist at 50. By the way, Jonathan says, when I said I was the last user of Wordle, he says, no, you're not. And he says, Wordle makes me curdle. Okay, good wordplay there. Thank you. And Susan Stein's watching and says, hi, everyone. It's been a while since I've joined the reading, watching from a rainy Connecticut. Thank you, Susan, for being here. We love having you back. And this has been a great show already with Jennie Coughlin. Sunday Business cover is The Bottom Line Case for Democracy. Fearing the rising distrust could spell doom for their businesses, several companies are offering employees lessons in civics. Melissa Eddy, my former student's story. I look forward to reading this. I think that would be very good. A lot of businesses don't want you thinking anything about politics. Others are forcing you to know one side or the other. This one might be kind of a middle road approach. Robots are pouring drinks. Servers are striking. For some blue-collar workers, automation has made their jobs more difficult. I did not know about this story. And there may be a great local connection. This is in Detroit, but the story could have easily been done in New York too if they're starting those here. Sunday opinion cover is Recasting History. America's Confederate Monuments deserve dramatic dismantling. The melting down of a Charlottesville statue could show the way. Neil and I and our entire Digimentors team are so proud to work with the Southern Poverty Law Center, which helped kill the Klan and is bringing down these statues around the country. Nick Kristof on the equations of morality and strategy in Gaza. And I was a 34-year-old college student scrambling to complete my schoolwork and feed my daughter. I can't imagine how tough that could be. And Brett Stevens on a plan for turning Hamas's assets into liabilities. And finally, the Sunday Styles cover is Unusual Story. TikTok's finest lobster man. Some popular new personalities on social media earn their money with their hands. The sponsorships are just a nice bonus. So I wonder if these two stories should be read together, right? About how some blue collar jobs are in trouble and then some blue collar jobs are using technology to get more famous and things like that. That's just fascinating. And Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, influencer, almost 25 years after her death, she has become the muse of the season. So sad. John F. Kennedy Jr. and Carolyn Bessette Kennedy on their wedding day in 1996. For most people who may not remember, she died along with her husband, John F. JFK Jr., and I believe her sister in a plane crash in 1997. And that was a summer with so many horrible stories, including Princess Diana's death. I remember that summer very, very clearly. Though, wait a minute, I think Diana died in 97 and this was 99. So I'm messing up my summers. All right. We're going to give Jennie here a moment to just catch her breath, and then we're going to come back to her in just a moment. So Jennie, we'll be right back to you. And I'm going to ask Neil to come back and talk to us a little bit about what's coming up. We have some great shows coming up in the next few weeks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sri. And before we talk about next week's upcoming shows, I want to remind people that the New York Times for Kids is on our website by special arrangement with the New York Times. It'll only be on our website until noon today, the PDF of the New York Times for Kids. So check it out, download it. It's a special print-only section, so you can't find it anywhere else unless you subscribe to the paper. But you can get it on our website.
For anybody under 12, 13, anywhere in the world, so if you have a nephew, cousin, grandkids, whatever, who fits that age group, please print this out, download the PDF, and mail it to them, email it to them, WhatsApp it to them. Anywhere in the world, they can get it till noon Eastern, so you have 2 more hours to download it. Tell your friends, please, to get it.
So you can go to digimentors.group/NYT readalong, or look for NYT readalong at the top of the page, and you'll find this week's show. As far as a few announcements, as we mentioned, first our upcoming shows. Next week, Jason Del Rey will be joining us. He is the author of Winner Sells All, Amazon, Walmart, and the Battle for Our Wallets. We're looking forward to that show. We mentioned Amy Padnani will be joining us November 19th. So I want to just point out that we're going to be going every other week for a few weeks because of holidays. Jason is November 5th. We're going to skip November 12th because of Diwali, Indian New Year's, but Amy will join us November 19th. And then we'll take a break for Thanksgiving. And then our big show after that, Adam Nagorny, author of The Times, How the Newspaper of Record Survived Scandal, Scorn, and the Transformation of Journalism. We are thrilled to be having Adam join us, perfect for our audience. But I want to make sure you note the time. This is going to be the first Sunday after Thanksgiving. It's 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, later than we usually go, but it's 8:30 a.m. for him in Los Angeles. So we wanted to give him a chance to get a good night's sleep before the show.
And of course, he's a famous New York Times correspondent, writer, columnist, etc. So you'll want to tune in for that. So Neil, as our executive producer, I'm so excited to see what you've been able to pull together in the coming episodes. So we also want to remind everyone the show is produced by Digimentors, our company. We do digital marketing, help with events and digital programs, strategic communications, training and workshops, and staffing and recruiting. Contact us if we can help you have your own podcast, for example, or you'd like a newsletter. Please let us know. And speaking of newsletters, please check out my newsletter. It's on Substack, sreenet.substack.com, sreenet.substack.com. And speaking of our events, Neil, we have on November 9th, it's a big deal when Neil comes up to New York, but he's going to come up from DC for this AI workshop as well as an all-star panel. It's called My Non-Scary Guide to AI. And we have terrific guests, Amy and Mikhail, joining us. You will want to watch live or in person. You can watch live in person, recorded in person. You can watch remotely from anywhere in the world. And we've got a 25% off, really inexpensive pricing already. Use the code READALONG at the link bit.ly/3AI November 9th, or just message us if you can't find it anywhere. We will tweet it, share it. It'll be the top of my Twitter feed. So please check it out. And now let's bring Jennie back to join us and give us a pro tip on anything she likes. She knows so much about so many things, but we'll let her share anything she likes.
So I think something that actually goes well with both the news that's going on right now and the marathon that's coming up. Catherine Switzer, who was the first woman to officially run the Boston Marathon, once said, if you're losing your faith in humanity, go out and watch a marathon. So for those who are in New York, next weekend, there will be a great opportunity to go out and see 50,000 people, 50,000 great stories, and renew your faith in humanity, which I think with all the news lately, a lot of folks could do with.
Well, wow. Renew your faith in humanity. We don't often get that as a way to end the show. So thank you very much, Jennie. You've been amazing. Jennie Coughlin is at Coughlin Jennie on Twitter. Please check her out. You can see her Twitter handle there. She's the audience editor of New York Times Metro. She once worked a 5 a.m. shift, but still joining us at 8:30 on a Sunday is a special gift to us. So thank you very much, Jennie. Some nice comments coming in here. Leovi says, thank you for the opportunity to join the read along. Jimmy Carter, not that Jimmy Carter, says, great show. Thank you. And Jonathan says, a very New York show. Thank you very much. And good luck next week. I know it's going to be a big week of news as well as the marathon itself. And I haven't checked. Is it still the TCS marathon?
It is still the TCS New York Marathon. And to Jonathan's comment, we have T-shirts on Metro that says we put the New York in the New York Times. So we were happy to put the New York into this today too.
I will just say, having grown up in New York at a time when there was very little awareness of India and South Asia, the fact that the marathon has been sponsored now, I think for a decade, by TCS, an Indian company, Tata Consulting Services is the original name, is surreal and really cool to see. So thank you all for watching. Dr. Chachi says it was great. Thanks as always. We'll catch you on your show, Dr. Chachi, on Instagram. Thanks very much, everybody.
Sri, before we go, just a reminder, if you joined us late, as soon as we finish, the show will be available to watch from the beginning on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and on our Digimentors website. There's a special Africa section that Sri is holding up, and a special New York Times for Kids. The PDFs are both of those are on our website. There's a comment.
The kids is only till noon Eastern today,
exactly.
But this is available permanently. Please go to digimentors.group, look for the New York Times read along link and download it. You will want to keep this, I promise you.
There's a comment that we failed to get in earlier. I want to make sure we put it up. Sandra said that it took 7 hours to run the marathon and eat pizza in every borough. 3 of us shared a slice in each borough. That makes sense if you're running, but very planned out to find slice joints that were directly on course. Plain only, yes, no pineapple. I couldn't endorse that more, and I definitely want to find out what places you went to. I don't think I'll be running a marathon, but maybe I'll drive to those places. That'd be interesting.
And folks, stay tuned for the special coverage next week. Jennie her team will be publishing a story about a New York Times team that drove the entire marathon and midday traffic, and we were guessing how long it would take. My guess was 2:30. There have been guesses as far as 4 or 5 hours. So we'll find out what the answer is.
I think that one's publishing Wednesday. Starting Wednesday, we'll have a couple of marathon stories going up every day, and then live coverage next Sunday, including from runners on the course.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny. It was great having you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye-bye, everyone.